Hi, it's Georgia Raisman. I'm here on Front Up with Peter Brace, and today we're going to talk about beach replenishment. And perhaps Peter has a more specific point, but I think that's what we intend to talk about. So, Peter, tell me what's on your mind.
Well, first, my name is Peter Brace. I am an environmental writer. I've written for the Nantucket Independent and Nantucket Beacon. I've written 2 books, Walking Nantucket, A Walker's Guide to Exploring Nantucket on Foot, and Nantucket and Natural History, and I have a business called Nantucket Walkabout, where I guide natural history hikes on conservation land, and I am the environmental writer for the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. So, do you have questions for me?
I know that the Coastal Conservancy has taken a strong position against beach replenishments or actually beach changes of any sort. So tell me what their position is.
Well, then I think at Coastal Conservancy we believe that beaches should be left in their natural state to come and go as they please. Mm-hmm. We believe that retreat is better than building a structure, although we would go along with a soft structure like coir fiber bags or jute fiber bags, which release sand over time. So we're not an advocate for hard structures like rock walls and groins, revetments, geotubes. So we are, if that's going to happen, then we would like the town to decide. We would like large projects like the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund's expansion in front of Baxter Road to be a town meeting vote, not just 5 members of our select board.
Well, why do you feel that something that's essentially a science-based issue should be a public issue, a publicly decided issue?
Because the beach in front of the beach when they want to do the expansion is town beach. It's public. It's yours. It's mine. Mm-hmm. I should have a say. Should be able to get up and
the Bluff Walk is also a town asset, and the Bluff Walk is being saved by the Geotube project, according to the Beach Preservation Fund people.
I would argue that it's only been 5 years since that project has been in there, 3-4 years. Not long enough time for us to know that it has been saved.
Well, but if it disappears, then we would know it hadn't been saved. So, I mean, the downside is worse than allowing it to continue, isn't it?
The downside is that some of the ways that come off of the Bluff Walk have been blocked off by some of the property owners. The downside is that they SBPF has said that they're going to extend that beyond where it is, and that hasn't happened.
Extend what?
Extend the Bluff Walk beyond where it is. It's supposed to be moved beyond. It used to go all the way from the lighthouse. Right.
Yeah.
Then it has fallen
been eroded
back.
away.
And the way that Mr. Flagg, William Flagg, who developed the whole area from the lighthouse back to town, made the Bluff Walk was that it was a moving easement. So if the bluff migrated, the Bluff Walk went with it.
Really?
And that hasn't happened.
Really? That's interesting. I didn't know there could be such a thing as a moving easement.
Well, he set it up that way. I know that there will be people who dispute that. He also set the lots up so that they were deep enough so that if you had your house threatened by erosion, that you could move it. Mm-hmm. The road, Baxter Road, is built on an easement across those properties. So before people started selling the road on the other side, selling the property on the other side, you had
an option of moving your house back to the other side.
A lot of people sold that and then ran out of room.
Right.
So,
right. So that's true. What I was struck by when I talked to Josh Posner the other week about this was the issue of property tax loss to the town.
So it's contentious during the process when the original geotubes were approved. The point was made by his organization that we lose land and we lose money off the tax roll. Mm-hmm. But our tax assessor came in at one of the hearings and said that wasn't correct. That we do lose land, and then that loses money off the tax roll. But then the assessed value of houses go up. You also have to remember that there are other housing projects that are being built with new houses coming in. Mr. Posner and Mr. Feely have proposed a 40B with 156 houses that'll add to the tax roll. So, plus all the other projects, I'm not saying that that's going to happen or the other projects are, but the loss of land doesn't mean that you lose, from the way I understand it, and I could be wrong, but from the tax assessor, we don't lose revenue because the value of the remaining property goes up. And, as we all know, conservation organizations buy land made available to them, land that developers might want to get a hold of. When you take that land out of contention for development, you are then making the land that exists more valuable, which then drives up the property values. So the same thing is happening when we lose land to the ocean. So I don't necessarily buy that.
It does reduce the amount of available land that could be taxed. That's true, and therefore, in theory, the remaining land is more valuable.
Right.
On the other hand, if houses drop into the ocean, they're not being taxed anymore, and the neighboring houses that are then at risk. I think the example that Josh gave, the neighboring houses that are at risk, go to the town and say, my house is likely to fall into the ocean, and therefore it's not worth $2.5 million. It's worth $500,000, and therefore my taxes shouldn't be $45,000. They're $5,000, and therefore the town loses revenue every year sufficient to pay for a doctor, a policeman, a teacher, a firefighter. That's every year. So granted, there are additional housing being built, and that would take place anyway. That'd take place anyway. So, putting aside the fact that there are always going to be additional houses, you're still losing that one firefighter revenue or the one firefighter salary. I think his point was, and I for one don't see it as a bad point. They're undertaking a project at their cost and expense that's saving the town money and not losing the town money, and not harming anyone so far as anyone can prove yet. And they have 5 years of data.
Yes, but we also know that if they go ahead with this expansion, that there will be some cost sharing for taxpayers.
Somewhat sharing?
Cost sharing, you share the cost of the thing that's being paid for. The taxpayers are going to have to pay. I don't have the data on that, but I know that eventually the taxpayers are going to have to pay some money toward the expansion of that.
I guess that has to come up at the Concom, right? Or
Right,
at some
yes,
point.
it has
I haven't heard anything about
Right.
taxpayers sharing it yet.
I believe the Concom hearings will start in September.
So then we'll have certainty about that. I have
Right.
not heard anything about putting a burden on anyone except the people who are benefiting from it themselves right now.
Right.
It's a good. Even Josh said there's a question about the long-term viability of the project and the long-term viability and the determination of the people behind it to keep funding it. And I think, in my mind, it's a question of how long it takes for people to get used to the idea that this is a moving bluff, and eventually it may not be there.
Well, it's a moving bluff a lot quicker on the ends where there isn't protection. So the geotubes sit there. The geotubes are impounding the sediment that's in the bluff. The ocean's going to take the sand where it can get the sand. If the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund can find a way to keep those geotubes covered all the time, providing the sand, they're required by the current permit to provide 22 cubic yards per lineal foot. They can do large replenishments in November and April and after storms. But we documented with photographs that the geotubes, for the largest extent for a lot of time during the first quarter of 2018, were left exposed because it's hard for them to just react and come right away and get the sand and cover it up. And the winter time, that period of time, is the stormy season. So that's understandable. But if they're to be given permission to build a geotube, then our thinking is that they have to provide the sand that would otherwise be provided by the bank, so that the beaches that are updraft of that then get replenished. Like I said, it's been 5 years, so we're not sure if the beaches updraft have been affected, but we saw how the threat is there. We saw what happened to Pulpus Road. We had storms that drove the waves of the pond. Because we didn't get a lot of snow, and we had water. Typically when it snows and you have cold, the snow in the springtime slowly melts off and goes into the groundwater, but we had mostly rain all winter long,
Right.
which swelled the pond. So you had waves breaking on the shore.
Right.
If we don't have that barrier beach there, then we're going to have open ocean breaking on that. And we have not yet proven that
Right across
the
Succotash.
installation of the geotubes have affected that beach and the beaches northward. We need more time,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that may well play out. But what I'm saying is that when you put that structure in front of that bank, which for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, well, tens of thousands of years have been supplying sand to the beach, to this area. Well, let me say thousands of years because Nantucket's only existed for 6,000 years. You're stopping the flow of sand from there. The ocean is going to take the sand from the south of it and the north of it, which means, and it's been scientifically proven, that you put a structure in front of a sand source, the sand in front of that structure is going to narrow, and you're going to slowly lose that beach, which means loss of public access. And I know that this isn't the South Shore, and I know that people don't use the beach as much, but nonetheless, it's a public beach. The public should have access to it. So,
Well, I guess they'll have to present their data and see what has happened so far, and
right.
see
They
what
have
happens
they
next.
have presented their data. They're required to monitor and come to the Conservation Commission and present their data. And we still maintain it has been long enough to see if there's been a serious impact. So.
It's very long, very expensive process.
Yes, it is. And I feel for the younger generation of the Wisconsin Beach Preservation Fund, because although the people currently funding it have the deep pockets to fund it, what comes after? Are they going to pick up that legacy? And because the ocean's coming up, we know that. How fast it comes
You
up.
know, in my mind, it's really almost an issue of acclimating, and no pun intended, acclimating to the fact that this is going to happen, and acclimating maybe that next generation, that it's not going to be their battle. Maybe their battle is going to be, okay, we'll move, we'll sell the house, we'll move,
Maybe.
pick the house up. But this generation that's been there, that feels it's got to preserve it, is going to spend a certain amount of money to try to do that. And the other issue is, as long as it's not hurting the upstream and downstream beaches, as long as that can be mitigated or militated against.
I don't see how it can. I don't think that we can do enough to unless there's a chute of sand coming down onto every section of that beach. All the time, keeping the sand that covered all the time, then you're going to have, if you don't have constant sand down there, how are you going to mimic that when there's a big storm? And let's say we get a storm that has 14-foot storm surge, and all the sand is taken off of there, and the storm rages on for 3-4 days, and then we get another storm. How are they going to get down there to cover that up? It's a challenge, I admit it.
And that sort of thing is inevitable. I mean, sooner or later it's going to happen. But
I want to say that getting approval for this, the original 947 feet, and then and potentially getting approval for the expansion, it's precedent setting. It sends a message to the rest of Nantucket. It already sent a message, it appears, to Pocomo, where 8 neighbors got together and did a soft solution, which we approve of, but it sends a message to people, hey, look, it might be working there. Let's do it elsewhere. So can you imagine the South Shore? I mean, a lot of the South Shore is owned by conservation organizations, but there are private people along the way. Can you imagine those structures on the South Shore?
the South Shore is a totally different geological situation.
You
though,
don't
and
know what's going to happen over
historically
time.
it's different. What's
Yeah.
interesting, I love on the Coastal Conservancy's page is that Worcester Polytechnic Institute Kids report.
Right.
It's a great report, and I love the historic photographs and the historic maps of where the shoreline was in
Right.
1888, and
Right.
the South Shore is a totally different place. I
Yeah.
mean, the dramatic difference in that from 125 years, 140 years ago.
Sure.
So I think it's a little bit of a red herring or straw man to say this. They're going to say we can do this down here.
Well,
It's much more at risk and much more damaging, even in the short term.
It's not that
Than
they're
than-
going to say that they can do it. It's that people are of the mind that they might do it. We have a guy at Mothball Way who installed a steel structure in the ground outside of Conservation Commission jurisdiction in anticipation of his property eroding to the point where he needs to pick it up and move it beyond that structure. It's an attitude, and people come here for our beaches. They come here for our clean water, to swim in, to water ski in, to fish, to do whatever. If we incrementally take away those things, then people won't come here. So I personally like to walk beaches that aren't construction sites. So, and I want to say one final thing before I have to get out of here. The beaches, the Sankaty Bluff shows 3 different layers of periods of time over geological history. The Wisconsin layer, which is brought down by our glacier, the last glacier, the Laurentine ice sheet, between 10,000 and 75,000 years ago. All that terminal moraine material is exposed at the top of the bluff. Below that is the Sangamonian interglacial stage, when an ocean was here before the continental shelf was exposed during the Wisconsin glacial stage. And then beneath, and that was 75,000 to 125,000 years ago. And then beneath that is another glacial stage, the Illinoisan glacial stage, which was 125,000 to 350,000 years ago. And anybody who walked that beach after the storms we had this winter could see the Illinoisan layer, these incredible formations of clay and sediments. You walk the beach now, you can see what's known as Sankaty sand or glacial flour, the very, very fine sediments. There are fossils from those periods coming down, mollusks.
It's fascinating when you take your
It's
walk
fascinating,
there.
and
It
so
is.
if the Wisconsin Beach Preservation Fund gets to expand beyond that, a lot of that's going to get covered up. It's about the only place in Massachusetts where you can see that. And it shouldn't happen. I mean, we may not have a choice, but I feel very strongly about that. And I feel strongly that a lot of that area will become a construction site, and you won't be able to walk there all the time. So,
Well, I appreciate your coming in and telling
Sure.
me that, Peter. It's worth hearing. It's very much worth hearing.
All right.
Thank you so much.
good to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
Okay.
Always.